The dolorous passion and death of our Lord Jesus Christ. Chapter 14. Jesus led from Annas to Caiaphas. When Jesus was being led to Annas, he had passed the house of Caiaphas. He was now conducted back to it by a road that ran diagonally between the two. They were scarcely 300 paces apart. The road, which ran between high walls and rows of small houses belonging to the judgment hall of Caiaphas, was lighted up by torches and lanterns and filled with clamoring, boisterous Jews. It was with difficulty that the soldiers could keep back the crowd. Those that had outraged Jesus before Annas continued their jibes and jests and ill treatment before the crowd, abusing and ill-treating him the whole way. I saw armed men of all kinds belonging to the tribunal driving away little parties of wailing people who were compassionating Jesus, while to some that had distinguished themselves by reviling and accusing him, they gave money and admitted them with their companions into the court of Caiaphas. To reach the judgment hall of Caiaphas, one had to pass through a gateway into a spacious exterior court, then through a second gateway into another, which, with its walls, surrounded the whole house. This we shall call the inner court. A kind of open vestibule surrounded on three sides by a covered colonnade formed the front of the house, which was more than twice as long as it was broad, and before which was a level, open square. This vestibule, or forecourt, was called the atrium, into which entrances led from the three sides, the principal one being from the rear, that is, from the house itself. Entering from this side, one proceeded to the left under the open sky to a pit lined with masonry, wherein fire was kept burning. Then turning to the right, he would come upon a covered space back of a row of columns higher than any yet described. This formed the fourth side of the atrium and was about half its size. Here, upon a semicircular platform up to which led several steps, were the seats for the members of the council. That of the high priest was elevated and in the center. The prisoner, surrounded by the guard, stood for trial in the middle of the semicircle. Upon either side and behind him, down into the atrium, were places for the witnesses and accusers. 3 doors at the back of the judges' seats led into a large circular hall around whose wall seats were ranged. This room was used for secret consultations. On leaving the judges' seats and coming out into this hall, one found doors right and left. They opened upon flights of several steps, leading down into the inner court, which here, following the shape of the house, ran off into a circular form. On leaving the hall by the door on the right and turning to the left in the court, one found himself at the entrance of a dark, subterranean vault containing prison cells. They lay under the rear halls, which, like the open tribunal, were higher than the atrium, and consequently afforded space for underground vaults. There were many prisons in this round part of the court. In one of them, after Pentecost, I saw John and Peter sitting a whole night. This was when they were imprisoned, after Peter had cured the lame man at the beautiful gate of the temple. In and around the building were numberless lamps and torches. All was as bright as day. In the center of the atrium, besides, shone the great pit of fire. It was like a furnace sunk in the earth, but open on top. The fuel was, I think, peat, and it was thrown in from above. Rising from the sides to above the height of a man were pipes in the shape of horns for carrying off the smoke. In the center, however, one could see the fire. Soldiers, servants, the rabble, most of whom were bribed witnesses, were crowding around the fire. There were some females among them, girls of doubtful fame, who sold to the soldiers a reddish beverage by the glass, and, on receipt of a trifling sum, baked cakes for them. This scene of disorder and merriment reminded me of carnival time. Most of those that had been summoned were already assembled around the high priest Caiaphas on the semicircular platform, while here and there others were coming in. The accusers and false witnesses almost filled the atrium. Others were trying to force their way in, and it was only with difficulty that they were kept back. Shortly before the arrival of the procession with Jesus, Peter and John, still enveloped in the messenger mantles, entered the outer court of the house. Through the influence of one of the servants known to him, John was fortunate enough to make his way through the gate of the inner court, which, however, on account of the great crowd, was at once closed behind him. When Peter, who had been kept back a little by the crowd, reached the closed gate, the maidservant in charge would not let him pass. John interposed, but Peter would not have got in had not Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, who just then sought admittance, said a good word for him. Once inside, they laid off the mantles, which they gave back to the servants, and then took their place to the right among the crowd in the atrium, where they could see the judges' seats. Caiaphas was already seated in his elevated tribunal in the center of the raised semicircular platform, and around him were sitting about 70 members of the Sanhedrin. Public officers, the scribes, and the ancients were sitting or standing on either side, and around them ranged many of the witnesses and rabble. Guards were stationed below the platform, under the entrance colonnade, and through the atrium as far as the door by which the procession was expected. This door was not the one directly opposite the tribunal, but that to the left of the atrium. Caiaphas was a man of great gravity, his countenance florid and fierce. He wore a long, dull red mantle ornamented with golden flowers and tassels. It was fastened on the shoulders, the breast, and down the front, with shining buckles of various form. On his head was a cap, the top of which resembled a low episcopal mitre. The pieces front and back were bent so as to meet on top, thus leaving openings at the side, from which hung ribands. From either side of the head lappets fell upon the shoulders. Caiaphas and his counselors were already a long time assembled. Many of them had even remained since the departure of Judas and his gang. The rage and impatience of Caiaphas had reached such a pitch that, magnificently attired as he was, he descended from his lofty tribunal and went into the outer court, asking angrily whether Jesus would soon come. At last the procession was seen approaching, and Caiaphas returned to his seat.